St. Louis and I are here today to express our grave concerns about the devastating impact nuclear waste has had on this nation, especially Black and brown communities. We cannot talk about expanding nuclear energy in this country without first dealing with the federal government's continuing legacy of failing to properly remediate harmful nuclear waste in communities like mine. In St. Louis, nuclear contamination dates back to 1942 when, as part of the Manhattan Project, the federal government hired Mallinckrodt Chemical Works to process uranium in the heart of what is now my district in downtown St. Louis. The processing resulted in dangerous radioactive waste getting recklessly stored above ground near the St. Louis airport for decades. Near the airport is a waterway central to our community called Coldwater Creek, which sprawls across residential areas, schools, businesses, and parks affecting North St. Louis County. The improper storage of radioactive waste at this site persisted unchecked for decades. The material was left in the open, exposed to the rain and the wind. This callous mishandling of deadly waste allowed it to seep into the ground, contaminating Coldwater Creek as well as the soil and waterways in the surrounding communities. Though I didn't live right on the creek, I was told that during heavy rainfall, the water from the creek may have flooded my basement. During that summer, my basement flooded at least six times. My mother actually lived near Coldwater Creek, very close, and so my kids would play out there when they were visiting her. Not only did we not know how dangerous it was, we didn't even know it was contaminated at all. We had no reason to suspect or any warning at all that the creek could pose a possible risk to our health. After many years of neglect, the federal government sold the waste to Cotter Corporation for further for-profit processing, which moved it about a half mile north. What Cotter couldn't use to make money was illegally dumped in the nearby public landfill called Westlake Landfill. Such heartless and negligent action was a clear violation of federal law and common decency. As a result, radioactive waste remains both in Coldwater Creek and at Westlake Landfill, putting our communities in harm's way. In a shocking revelation, records released last July proved that the federal government both hid and downplayed the risk of this radioactive waste in St. Louis for nearly 75 years, and that radioactive waste was known to pose a threat to people living near Coldwater Creek as early as 1949. Despite this knowledge, however, federal officials repeatedly downplayed these risks as slight, minimal, low level. People in my district who were unknowingly exposed to this radiation are now living with serious chronic health conditions, including several types of rare cancers. I've had these conversations. I know many of these folks, and my heart breaks for them. Some of them are no longer with us. In 2014, the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services did an analysis of people living in the 8 zip codes around Coldwater Creek and Westlake Landfill. The report found breast, colon, prostate, kidney, and bladder cancer cases in the areas were significantly higher than average. Just to give one specific and chilling example, the Department of Health report found brain and other nervous system cancers were 300% more likely to be found in children age 17 and younger, living in the zip code closest to Westlake Landfill. It was not until 2016, which is 67 years later, that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention finally began advising the community to avoid Coldwater Creek entirely. To this day, people in my district continue to allow their children to play in Coldwater Creek because they still aren't aware of that it's contaminated. There are no signs to indicate any danger or to properly warn folks of the high contamination levels in the creek. That's why I am currently working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency to put up this urgently needed signage. The federal government still has not provided Missourians any funding to help families test their homes, their businesses, or their schools to ensure they are not living with and sending their children to school in a place with unhealthy levels of radiation. As this toxic waste continues to devastate my community, Neither the federal government nor those private sector contractors who reap benefits, they reap profits from their shoddy work, have provided financial compensation to the victims of the Manhattan Project in St. Louis. Shame. In 2022, Jana Elementary, a school in Florissant, Missouri, in my district, was shuttered after privately conducted testing revealed radiation levels that were 22 times higher than normal healthy levels. They were found in classrooms, the cafeteria, and the playground. My constituents were again unknowingly sending their children every day to a school that was exposing them to dangerously high levels of radiation. And no, this was not a new school. All of this was substantiated in the recent GAO report I requested along with Ranking Member Raskin, which confirms what we've been saying for years. I ask unanimous consent to enter this report into the record, which finds the federal government has failed to remediate these two sites in St. Louis.
Without objection, so moved.
And so not only in St. Louis, but in many other communities across our country. This GAO report also finds that the St. Louis sites with Manhattan Project waste are found near the most underserved communities of any remediation sites around the country. Mr. Chairman, I wrote to you in October requesting a field hearing in Missouri's 1st District to investigate this ongoing environmental catastrophe and hear directly from Missourians whose lives and families have suffered the grievous effects of this preventable and heartbreaking health crisis. I would like to renew my request for a field hearing right here, right now. This shameful legacy of negligence and lies has hurt so many people in St. Louis, and they continue to suffer to this day. Actions need to be taken to remediate the damage that has clearly and what we know has already been done before we start talking about expanding nuclear energy in this country. We have a responsibility to both fix and learn from our mistakes before we risk subjecting any other communities to the same exposure. Thank you, and I yield back.
I think we're talking